They said his heart beat twice, once for him and once for something else. The boy was born on a Sunday morning in the spring of 1953 in a small rural town tucked inside the red clay hills of Alabama. The nurse who delivered him, a woman with 40 years of experience, would later tell her daughter that she had never heard anything like it. Two distinct rhythms pulsing beneath the same fragile chest. The mother thought it was a miracle. The father called it a curse, but the boy's name was Samuel. But in the hospital records that remain, you'll only find the initials SM. They tried to erase him long before his story ever began. The local doctor said it was an echo defect, a strange vibration in the heart wall. But when they brought Samuel home, the house began to change. The clocks lost their rhythm. The dog wouldn't enter his room. At night, his mother would wake to the sound of two separate heartbeats. One fast, human, afraid, and another slower, heavier, deliberate, like something ancient remembering its shape. By the time Samuel was 6, he had learned to hide his second pulse. He pressed his palm to his chest when teachers asked him to recite. He avoided the other boys at school. He said he could feel the other heart thinking, not feeling, thinking. No one believed him. No one wanted to. But in 1962, something happened that forced the town to remember. The doctor who delivered Samuel was found dead in his study, his chest torn open, the left side hollowed out, the ribs bent outward, as if something had pushed through from the inside. And on the desk in his typewriter was a single unfinished note. It said only, "It's growing, the boy." The rest was lost to blood. For decades, the town buried the memory under church sermons in drought and silence. But the files, the ones the hospital tried to burn, were found 50 years later, sealed inside a tin box beneath the floorboards of the old clinic. And what they revealed, what they proved, would shatter the medical record and reopen a wound America was never meant to see. They called it the two-heart case. But that name hides something much darker, because Samuel wasn't just born with two hearts. One of them wasn't his. By the time Samuel turned 10, the town had learned to look away. Children whispered about him in the schoolyard, calling him the hum, because if you stood close enough, you could hear a faint vibration coming from his chest, not a normal beat, but a low droning pulse that felt almost mechanical. His teachers tried to ignore it. His pastor called it a test from God. His mother began to pray over him every night until her voice cracked. But his father started to drink. There were nights when Samuel would wake to find his father standing over him, a belt in one hand, a Bible in the other, mumbling about, cutting out what don't belong. The boy's cries would echo through the thin wooden walls until morning. And when he went to school, his shirt buttoned to the throat, the bruises shaped like handprints could be seen beneath the collar. Then, in the winter of 1964, Samuel collapsed during Sunday service. The congregation gathered around as the preacher placed his ear against the boy's chest. Witnesses later said the man's face went white as bone. He stepped back and whispered, "There's something alive in there." Doctors from Birmingham were called in to examine him. They took X-rays, blood samples, and finally, they opened him up. What they found inside was not a simple malformation. It was two fully developed cardiac systems, one on the right, one on the left, connected by a web of fused arteries that pulsed in opposite directions. Each heart had its own rhythm, its own electrical signature. But the strangest part wasn't what they found. It was how the boy reacted when they touched the second heart. His body seized, his eyes rolled back, and he began speaking in a voice that wasn't his, low, measured, not childlike at all. The surgeon swore. He said, "I remember this room." The medical report was classified that same week. Every doctor who signed it later retracted their statement. The hospital claimed the second heart was a diagnostic error. The photographs were destroyed, the samples disappeared, and Samuel was sent home with no explanation. But something had changed in him. The other heartbeat, the slow one, began to grow stronger. It overpowered his own. At night, his mother swore she could hear two people breathing in his room, one awake, one waiting. And then, the animals started dying. It began with the chickens. The family kept a small coop behind the house. 15 hens, 1 rooster. One morning, Samuel's mother found them all lying in the dirt, their bodies intact but their eyes wide open, the cums drained of color. No blood, no struggle, just absence. The air in the coop felt heavy, as if something had pulled the breath out of it. His father said it was poison in the feed. But by the end of the week, the neighbor's dog was found dead, curled up against Samuel's window. Then the livestock, cattle with no wounds, no sickness, just gone still in the night. People whispered that Samuel had the devil's pulse. His classmates refused to sit near him. Some parents kept their children home, and the local pastor began holding private meetings, saying the boy had been marked. Inside the house, the tension became unbearable. His mother's prayers grew louder. His father's drinking turned violent. Samuel stopped speaking altogether. He would sit for hours by the window, his hand resting over his chest, whispering to himself in a language no one recognized. One night, his mother crept into his room and found him awake, staring into the mirror. He said, without turning to her, "He wants out." When she asked who Samuel said, "The one who remembers." By 1966, the family was falling apart. The father was arrested after a fight at the local bar. The mother sent Samuel to live with his aunt outside of Montgomery, hoping distance would quiet whatever haunted him. But it followed. The aunt wrote in her diary that Samuel slept with his hands crossed over his chest, pressing down as though trying to hold something inside. And then came the hospital visit that would vanish from record for 50 years. Samuel, now 12, was admitted to a state facility after collapsing during school. His pulse was recorded at two distinct frequencies, one 72 beats per minute and another 38, both steady, both coming from the same chest cavity. What the attending physician discovered in the scans should have been impossible. The second heart wasn't organic anymore. It had changed. Its texture, its color, even its pattern of contraction, all wrong. It wasn't just beating, it was reacting. The doctor's name was Charles Whittaker, a quiet man, veteran of the Korean War, trained in the early days of cardiac imaging. His notes were found decades later in a sealed envelope labeled simply SM, Montgomery case. Inside were sketches, X-ray plates, and a single page written in trembling script. The second heart responds to emotion. When the boy cries, it grows warm. When he's afraid, it stops. Whittaker became obsessed. He began studying Samuel daily, charting the rise and fall of both pulses under different conditions, temperature, light, noise. But something else began happening, something he couldn't explain. Instruments in the room malfunctioned, lights flickered. His own watch, a gift from his wife, stopped at 13:11 every time he entered the boy's room. Samuel wouldn't speak, but he would listen. His eyes followed the doctor everywhere, calm and unblinking. Whittaker described the gaze as older than the body that holds it. He swore that, at times, when Samuel's heartbeat slowed, another rhythm could be heard faintly through the walls, like an echo coming from behind the plaster. Then came the night shift report, the one the hospital erased. A nurse on duty found Whittaker slumped over his desk, unresponsive but alive. When they revived him, he said he'd heard a second heartbeat in his own chest, pulsing in time with the boys. For a full hour afterward, every monitor in the ward displayed the same pattern, two synchronized hearts beating across 6 patients. The next morning, Samuel was gone, his bed empty, his chart missing. Whittaker never recovered. He resigned 2 weeks later and disappeared into the Gulf states, last seen preaching on a roadside about shared vessels and borrowed blood. The official record says Samuel was transferred to another facility, though no transfer form was ever filed. What little remains suggests something darker, that he wasn't moved, but taken. A private letter found in Whittaker's home years later reads, "They want to study what isn't theirs. But it doesn't belong to medicine anymore, it belongs to memory." And that's where the trail goes cold, until the late 1970s, when a young medical intern stumbled across an unmarked file labeled SM deep in the archives of a now demolished Alabama hospital. Inside was a photo, faded, grainy, a boy, eyes closed, chest scarred, and under the skin a shape pressing outward, almost like a second heartbeat trying to rise to the surface. The intern's name was Robert Lane. He was 23, newly married, and fresh out of residency. He wasn't supposed to be in that basement archive at all. He'd been sent there on an errand to fetch old pathology reports. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when the past is still alive. He opened that unmarked file and found not only the photograph, but a spool of magnetic tape labeled Patient 34B audio log. It was brittle with age, recorded sometime in 1968. When Lane brought it upstairs and played it on an old reel-to-reel, he expected the dull hum of a corrupted tape. Instead, he heard a child's breathing. Then a heartbeat, one, then another, slower, heavier, and finally a voice. "Doctor, it remembers you." The tape ends with a sudden crash and a sound like someone striking metal. Lane thought it was a prank until that night, when he began hearing a faint echo in his own stethoscope, a double rhythm under his skin. He went back to the archives the next day. The file was gone. The cabinet door bent inward, the padlock snapped clean. He tried to tell his supervisor, but the man simply told him, "There are things in this state we don't revisit." Lane quit medicine the next month. But before he left, he mailed the photograph and a copy of the tape to a journalist in Atlanta, a man named Walter Grant, known for chasing stories the government wanted forgotten. 3 weeks later, Grant's apartment burned to the ground. His body was found near the window, clutching a melted recorder. The fire department called it electrical, but the heat pattern on the floor formed a perfect circle, charred in the center, untouched around the edges, as if something had pulsed outward. It was around this time that the urban legends began. Truckers claimed they saw a boy walking alone on Route 82 at night, barefoot, his shirt soaked through, a faint vibration in the air as he passed. Others swore they heard 2 heartbeats in the silence between static when driving through that stretch. Locals began calling it the hum line. They said if you pulled over there and listened long enough, you could hear your own pulse begin to echo it. Some dared each other to try. Most came back pale, shaking, unable to explain what they'd heard. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you hide it or try to understand it? Because one family did try, and they paid for it in ways that still echo through the dirt of that small Alabama town. In 1983, a woman named Ruth McAllister purchased the old farmhouse where Samuel was born. She didn't know its history. At least, not at first. She was a widow with 2 young boys, looking for quiet, affordable land. The real estate agent told her the house, character. What he didn't tell her was that no one had lived there longer than a season since the late 1960s. The first sign came within days. The clock she brought from her old home began ticking out of sync. The kitchen clock's second hand would skip every other beat. Her youngest, Danny, complained that his room buzzed at night, like the walls were humming. Ruth thought it was electrical until the power went out and the sound didn't stop. Then she found the box. Buried behind a false panel in the pantry was an old tin container, rusted but sealed. Inside were hospital documents, faded Polaroids, and a child's medical bracelet with the initials SM scrawled in worn ink. Ruth didn't understand what she was looking at. 2 X-rays showing mirrored cardiac shadows, reports signed and crossed out, and a photograph of a boy who looked eerily like her eldest son. From that night on, the house seemed to breathe differently. When she lay in bed, she could hear faint rhythmic knocks in the walls, sometimes slow, sometimes uneven, like a heartbeat struggling to find its pace. Her sons began waking in the night, saying they'd seen the quiet boy standing in the hallway, always silent, always holding his chest. One morning, Ruth found small handprints in the dust on her bedroom mirror, too small to belong to either of her children. She tried to wipe them away, but the glass fogged over instantly, as if exhaling. Her journal from those months, recovered years later by her sister, is almost unreadable toward the end. The handwriting becomes frantic, desperate. One entry simply reads, "The walls are remembering." Another, "The sound is inside me now." The last entry was written the night before she disappeared. It says, "He's not a ghost. He's a body looking for its other half." Her sons were found wandering a nearby field at dawn, dazed but unharmed. Both were clutching their chests. Their heart rates were mismatched, one fast, one impossibly slow. The house was condemned shortly after. But in the county records under the property history, one word was added in pencil: reclaimed. The house sat empty for nearly 20 years after that. Locals avoided it, not out of superstition exactly, but from something deeper. That quiet southern instinct that knows when land has taken something and won't give it back. The county tried to sell it twice, once in '91 and again in '98, but both buyers withdrew before signing. The inspectors said the structure was unstable, though one of them later confessed he never went past the front door. In 2003, the property was purchased by a historical society from Birmingham. They said they wanted to restore it, turn it into a museum of rural medical history. They brought cameras, geologists, even an anthropologist. But within a week, 2 of them had quit, and one refused to speak about what he'd seen in the cellar. The lead researcher, a woman named Dr. Elaine Foster, stayed. Her field notes, which surfaced only after her death, described something extraordinary buried beneath the kitchen floor. A small cavity in the soil lined with warped boards. Inside were remnants of old medical equipment, rusted clamps, glass jars, syringes, a cracked surgical mirror. And in the center, wrapped in layers of deteriorating cloth, was what she called preserved cardiac mass. It was the size of a fist, desiccated, dark, impossible to classify. Yet when she unwrapped it, the instruments in her lab began to register faint electrical activity, rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat muffled under layers of earth. She sent the specimen to a private lab in Atlanta. The results came back inconclusive. Human tissue, yes, but genetically dual, containing 2 distinct DNA sequences, one male, one unidentified. The lab destroyed the sample immediately after. Foster never published her findings. She died 3 months later of what was officially labeled a cerebral hemorrhage. Her colleagues said she'd been hearing the hum again in her office walls, and that's where the line between science and story begins to dissolve. Because years later, when the building she worked in was demolished, construction crews reported something strange. The foundation beneath her office was unnaturally warm. When they dug, they found a small circular burn pattern, just like the one in Walter Grant's apartment. Whatever Samuel carried inside him had survived his body. It had moved, not through blood or bone, but through remembrance, through anyone who dared to look too closely. By then, the locals had already given it a new name. They didn't call it the boy with 2 hearts anymore. They called it the inheritance. They say stories die when the last person who remembers them does. But in that part of Alabama, the story of Samuel McAllister, the boy with 2 hearts, refuses to rest. It doesn't fade, it circulates. Like a pulse passed from one generation to the next, always just below the skin. By the 2010s, strange things began happening again around the old property line. Hunters reported hearing rhythmic thuds beneath the ground, too regular to be machinery, too deep to be wind. Locals began finding dead birds near the fence posts, all lying in the same direction, as if drawn by something magnetic. Even stranger were the photographs. Hikers who visited the site took pictures of the overgrown house and found, when they developed them, faint distortions in the film's circular ripples, like the air itself was breathing. In 2015, a podcaster from Atlanta decided to investigate. His name was Henry Cole, a man obsessed with Southern folklore and medical anomalies. He visited the property with a small crew, recording everything. The audio is still online, though most versions are heavily edited. In the uncut tape at timestamp 27 and 13, Cole asks his producer if she can hear the low hum. Then the sound begins to pulse, slow at first, then faster, until the static drowns out their voices. The recording ends with Cole whispering, "It's under us." The next day, the team's car was found abandoned on a dirt road 5 miles away. All their equipment was inside. No sign of a struggle. Cole's phone, recovered weeks later, contained a single unsent message to his wife, 2 hearts. Not his anymore. Whatever happened that night, the land hasn't been touched since. Even satellite imaging seems to blur that small square of Alabama soil, like the map itself resists remembering. The county closed the area under environmental review, though no report has ever been published. And yet, sometimes, people driving that stretch of road still say they feel it. A faint vibration through the steering wheel. A slow rhythm rising through the tires, sensing for just a moment with their own heartbeat, before breaking away, leaving them hollow, breathless, like something inside them has been quietly rewound. Those who know the legend say it's not haunting, it's continuation, because Samuel didn't die, not exactly. He was absorbed, and what was inside him learned to live on its own. In 2019, a construction company bought the surrounding acreage to clear it for a new highway extension. The old farmhouse was long gone by then, nothing left but the foundation and a few stone steps leading to nowhere. But as soon as the machines broke ground, their engines began to fail one by one. The foremen called it bad luck, the men called it something else. They said the earth there moved differently. On the 3rd day of digging, one of the operators, a man named Lewis Carter, reported hitting something hollow. He described the sound as metallic but not man-made, more like a shell that echoed from deep beneath. When they opened the trench, they found a sealed chamber no larger than a coffin, lined with red clay and fractured glass, and within it, fused to the soil itself, was what appeared to be a ribcage, not animal, not human, half-formed, distorted, as if two skeletons had been trying to grow into one. The bones vibrated faintly when touched. Not a sound you could hear, but a tremor you could feel. They covered it back up by dusk, and by morning the entire site was cordoned off by state authorities. The official statement said it was a historical burial, though no investigation ever appeared in the records. Lewis Carter quit the next day. He told his wife he could hear the sound in his ears even after he left, a slow pulse that made his vision blur when he tried to sleep. 2 weeks later, he drove out to the site at night and never came home. His truck was found idling on the road shoulder, headlights still on, driver's door open. On the seat was his hard hat and his watch, frozen at 3:11 a.m., and this is where the story stops being local, because after that incident, researchers from out of state, biologists, physicists, even people who claim to be from the CDC, started showing up quietly, taking samples, sealing off wells, recording the hum with subsonic microphones. One of them, years later, admitted that whatever frequency pulsed beneath that soil wasn't random. It matched the rhythm of a human heartbeat, only slower, older, something that seemed to be learning to breathe again. And in a locked report that leaked in 2021, one chilling note appeared in the margins, written by an anonymous hand. It's not dead tissue. It's waiting for contact. By the time that report surfaced, the story had already slipped into rumor. A handful of online forums started trading pieces of it, grainy photos, fragments of government memos, claims from anonymous locals who said they'd felt the heartbeat themselves. But there was one upload that no one could explain. It appeared late one night on an unlisted YouTube channel with no name, no description. Just a single video titled SM Recording, Do Not Amplify. The video was 30 seconds long, all static at first, but if you turned the volume up, you could hear it. The sound of two overlapping heartbeats, one faint, one deep and resonant. At the 20-second mark, a voice whispered, "Remember me." The clip vanished within hours, but not before being mirrored by dozens of users across the country. Every copy that stayed online longer than a day began to distort. The audio would double back on itself, the rhythm stuttering until it matched the listener's pulse exactly. People in the comments claimed it made them dizzy, that they could feel their chests tighten, that for a moment they weren't sure which heartbeat was theirs. A few of them recorded themselves watching it. In each video, the moment the deeper pulse began, their eyes unfocused, then flicked toward the corner of the room, as if hearing something behind them. Authorities denied involvement. But in the months that followed, 3 of the original uploaders disappeared. One was found in his apartment in Kansas City, alive but catatonic, his hands pressed against his chest, whispering, "He's looking for the other one." That was when the pattern began. Every state where someone reported the hum, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Kansas, sits directly above an ancient sediment belt known as the Selma Chalk Formation. Geologists later confirmed that this belt runs continuously underground, directly beneath every known location connected to the two-heart case. It's as if whatever Samuel carried didn't die with him. It spread, not through bloodlines, but through the very ground that made him. And if that's true, it means it's still moving, still remembering. Because the hum hasn't stopped. It's only slowed, waiting for something, or someone, to bring it back to full rhythm. And some researchers now believe it doesn't just echo in the earth. It might echo in us,